on to the next issue. All right. And what is our next issue? It is extremely simple and yet complicated. Why is the EU in crisis? What lies ahead? So, what is happening in the EU? And I'll just start with France and Germany, and then Glenn, you can well further. The two great European powers at the heart of the EU, both of them are in political limbo. Germany's coalition government has collapsed in acrimony over the budget. France's left and far right are openly talking about ousting Prime Minister Michel Barnier's government in the weeks ahead. Note that Michel Barnier comes from a party that got 5-6% of the vote, almost nothing. And yet he was invited to be Prime Minister by Emmanuel Macron, President Emmanuel Macron, who is running a Jupiterian presidency, who is the Emperor of France, the modern day Emperor of France. And the reality is that
the poor guy, everyone, any politician will be crucified for an unfortunate choice of a word because you can never escape it afterwards. But he is so stereotypical of the French elite. But
he's Lénard all the way through.
But he's no
Lénard.
different.
You know them very well, Lénard. Peter Isaacson, our chief strategy officer, knows them quite well, I'm sure.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
No. My point is that I do not remember the last time both France and Germany could not pass a budget so late in the year. This never happened during the Cold War. This did not happen even when coalitions fell apart, and they did in the past. And Alexander Gloy is one of our contributing editors. He's a German economist. He is a brilliant analyst of both economics and indeed of Europe. And in his article, he points out that collapse is significant because the traffic light coalition, which was Social Democrats, Greens, and Free Democrats, SPD, Greens, and FDP. And they were named after their respective party colors. Greens, of course, green, yellow for the Free Democrats, FDP, and red for the Social Democrats. And Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who has the charisma of a dead mouse, he's known as the automaton. He dismissed Finance Minister Christian Lindner of FDP. And that was because budget disagreements, there's a hard break under German law, and you cannot cross it. And there was talk about cutting funding for sections of society and to Ukraine. But anyway, long story short, now you do not have a budget. You will have new elections. You have political instability. We know what happened in France this year. The far right won the first round, and then in the second round, everyone ganged up against them, so they are out of power. But the ragtag bunch in parliament cannot agree on anything. And the left and the far right are closer in economic policy to each other than to Macron's ensemble. And in fact, Macron chose a leader of the right to be prime minister, even though he'd got hardly any votes. In fact, he'd lost the primary to the leadership of his own party. So let me just quickly finish. So political instability is going to weaken. And France's politicians have said this is a Greece-like moment. And political instability is going to weaken Germany's ability to enforce debt rules on other European nations. So this, as Alex Gloy points out, has huge implications for the long-term stability of the Eurozone. So over to you, Glenn. You've lived in Europe, you have worked in Europe, you speak French, perfect French. What do you have to say?
What I have to say is that all of these issues are why I prefer to devote my virtual life to reading about French traders and trappers in Michilimackinac, what now is Michigan, but used to be at the far tip of Lake Huron in 1740. I can. It's a much happier world, even though there are scalpings and all sorts of clashes of continents there too.
Yeah.
Boy, okay, well, I want to add in the Ukraine war to what's happening in Europe and the world. And I guess my simple response is that with national permutations being important in Germany, France, Ukraine, Russia, Italy, the UK, Holland, Sweden, Italy, um, the deep issues I think are very similar to the same even as what is happening in the United States. This is a global phenomenon, I believe. Um, so we have, as you said, the rise of the far right in France, rise of the far right in Germany, rise of the far right in Hungary, sort of a populist surge in the UK, rise of the far right in Italy, and on and on. Why? Well, what has changed in Europe in 2024 as opposed to 1952, or I don't know. There again, immigration has put tremendous social strains on the definition of self and what a nation is and how people wish to live and how they feel secure or threatened economically, therefore in their stability of their and their families' lives and their communities. France, I think the UK and Germany have larger non-native populations than the United States. Uh, in percentage terms. And that's America has always had to cope with and has been defined by its strong immigration population. But that's not been the case for European societies, at least in the modern era, and now it is. And
And
the reaction.
there is the inevitable clash of cultures, because if you come from a society that sees women not wearing headscarves as fundamentally immoral, and then there are women bathing topless or even naked by the river, you think, ooh la la, anything goes. Then there is also the factor of political mobilization across borders. If we look at
Mhm.
the Turkish immigrants across Europe, over 65% of them, and we talked about it earlier, over 65% of them in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France. These are the numbers I remember vividly. In some places, the numbers were higher than 67%. That is 2 out of 3 people.
Yeah, yeah.
Vote for Recep Tayyip Erdogan, an Islamist. Turks in Turkey do not vote in such high numbers for Islamists as Turks in Europe. So there is clearly, obviously, there must be some discrimination, even today. Has to be, that's human nature. There are problems with assimilation. There is ghettoization, but there is also radicalization and political mobilization, which no society is going to entirely accept. Lest we forget, Europe had religious wars from 1618 to 1648, and we've spoken about that ad nauseum.
This gets to the same point that I tried to illustrate and that you developed with regard to the silly quote silly tale of my trying to buy an ice cream and being denounced for being somehow socially a racist. I used to, a kid, my French colleagues and friends, that I once had a business meeting in Marseille, and while I was waiting for the meeting to start, I had some time to walk around. I was walking around, and this is literally true. And I was down at the Canebière, which is sort of the center, the heart of Marseille. And so I was there for a couple of hours. And I told my French friends when I sat down at the meeting, I said, I just spent several hours as the only Frenchman in sight. And I'm not French. But I was literally the only person on the street of European descent, literally. Now it can be exciting and fine, and there's not intrinsically anything wrong with uh, dressing one way or speaking one way versus another. But if Marseille is the second largest or third largest French city, and there were no indigenous French people in sight among thousands, it's not necessarily, it's not proof of racism for a French person to say, "Whoa, what is happening here?" Perhaps I love North Africa, but I am trying to live in France where it has been defined by other things. It is a not necessarily racist reaction. I think that is part of, though I don't think that's clearly part of the explanation, or the fundamental explanation for the rise of the quote far right in across Europe and in the United States,
Yeah, I
linked
mean that
with
is true,
inseparable
and
from economic anxiety. Sorry.
that is true, and there's also been a cultural um, a cultural phenomenon similar to America, not as bad as America, but certainly a cultural phenomenon wherein if you say anything about any other community, you're racist, you're Islamophobic, you are labeled as fundamentally unenlightened, and people don't like that. In fact, I was in Germany, I was in Austria recently, and they said that, look, we need workers, we need more workers, we need skilled workers, we need immigration, but we also don't need ghettoization. And if you say that there is a problem with a certain community, let's say there are the Kurdish neighborhood or the Turkish neighborhood is a bit rough, then people will jump on you and say, you are the villain, you have prejudice. And people don't
Hmm.
like being A, accused, and B, quite often being preached to. Madonna's song, Papa Don't Preach, applies everywhere. If you become preachy
Well,
as a
to your
politician,
point,
you've lost your audience, you've lost your
absolutely,
voter.
absolutely. To your point about the one of the issues with the Democratic Party, and one of the explanations for why Donald Trump and the Republicans had such a clear victory in the last election. In European terms, there's this also this problem with the elites condescending to and dictating to the population as a whole. And sort of, there's the stereotypical tale, not, I don't think, apocryphal even. Why did the British vote for Brexit? It's because instead of having being able to go to the pub and to order a pint, they have to go and order a half liter, and and Brussels tells them what sort of how they have to characterize the bloody beer that they drink, and so they say enough. And meanwhile, the working class sees their jobs being done by Polish contractors instead of Yorkshiremen. Um, Similar phenomena and reactions, visceral and so on, in Germany and everywhere else in Europe. So and all of these
So,
things are linked to, once again, globalization, economic anxiety.
so what happens now? Because Alex Gloy, uh, our dear colleague, paints a very grim picture. He says that, look, German 10-year government bond yields are still 2.4%. France and Spain already pay a clear premium at 3.2%. Greece pays 3.3%. Italy is higher than Greece. Most people don't realize it. Italy pays 3.7%. Italy's debt to GDP ratio is 135%, Greece 162%, and still they pay lower interest rates than the UK. Of course, the UK has engaged in Brexit, 98%. And the US. The US is 123%. Now, the US has dollar as the reserve currency. The US is fine. But um, the euro area does not have a fiscal authority to complement the monetary authority. Yes, they have the European Central Bank, but Brussels can't just bail out, say, Greece. It's difficult to do transfers uh, from Germany to Greece as it is, compared to doing transfers from, say, New York to Mississippi or California to Montana. And this is the point, is that should there be further bailouts, and bailouts seem inevitable, because how are you going to cut spending? Who loses? Obviously, uh, every group is going to go on strike, particularly in France. So the implications of this inability to agree upon a budget show the strains both internally and externally, because Europeans are not going to pay for the Russia-Ukraine war. That is clear. If you cannot even form a budget, the elites can want all, can want to support Ukraine, plucky Ukraine against mighty Russia all day long. But people are not going to vote for it, because they're going to say, why should I have to pay higher costs for my healthcare? Why do I have to pay a little higher for university fees? And the strains in Europe, or especially the EU, are coming to roost.
Well,
The chickens are
what
coming to
lies ahead?
roost. What
We can
lies ahead?
describe
Does the EU
the
break up?
crisis, and we can propose, and the solutions are clear, but the willingness of um, the various factions that make decisions in Europe to resolve the internal tension is not at all clear. What I'm referring to is to address the economic strains of the European economies. At least two fundamental things have to happen. They have to increase labor flexibility and increase the workforce because of the demographic, shocking, historic aging of European societies. And the only way to do that is to increase immigration. Yet, by having addressed the problem for the past 70 years, the problem being one of labor need, by increasing immigration, they've created the social problems that paralyze the political system. Two, Europe has many wonderful attributes, and I would argue, in significant ways, a superior quality of life to that in the United States because of the nanny state. In many ways, they do provide more extensive health care and retirement and so on and so forth,
The
public transportation, blah blah
post-war
blah.
cradle to grave welfare state is very real and very cushy and very comfortable, which also means that it saps the willingness to work and the risk appetite and the
Flexibility.
entrepreneurial energy. And we talked about the $800 billion industrial
Correct.
policy proposal by a former European Central Bank big big boss, the former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi. So all of that is true.
And I would say that maybe the issue that can be addressed theoretically, but no one has succeeded. No European state really has succeeded, with the exception of Margaret Thatcher to some extent, is the regulatory structure that underpins the social welfare state. The example I like to give, I probably gave it here in some earlier talk, was
You did.
one, yeah, the German city that wanted to install, I think, solar panels or windmills. Good idea for a number of reasons. Fine, everyone likes it. They had to import some of the equipment from a neighboring town, which was 60 kilometers away, I guess. But before they could put the equipment on the road, they had to obtain 146 regulatory approvals. And so the country is paralyzed from making substantial changes. And yet, no one's willing to address the regulatory requirements, because that would get to what underpins the social welfare state. And no one has really been willing to or can do anything other than welcome more immigrants to work the economy. So
But
that's what's
just
going
to
to
that
happen.
point,
The question is, I
to
don't
that point,
know.
to that point, Europe has an economic crisis. Europe has lost social cohesion. The post-war cohesion is gone. Now you have too many parties pulling in too many different directions. You have institutions that have atrophied and have become sclerotic. There's been a thickening of process, and the process is now more important than the outcome. And as Peter Isaacson says repeatedly, political culture has changed. There is no left, there is no right. The traditional left in France is dead. The
Mhm.
traditional right in France is dead. Now you have Ensemble from Macron, which is a centrist grouping, arguably right. And then you
Mhm.
have NFP, which is a new bunch of more left combinations than earlier. And then you have Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter, Marine Le Pen, leading Rassemblement National, which is basically an incarnation or reincarnation of Front National. So you have complete flux. It is almost like at the end of the French Revolution. You had the Jacobins, you had the Girondins, then you maybe maybe uh, the various republics are in huge crisis. Maybe France needs sixth republic or a Napoleon Bonaparte yet again. Maybe
Well, I
Europe
mean, the strange
needs.
public certainly are to the point where there has been serious talk by serious people that the republic, will not um, continue. Yeah,
And
I
if the
think
republic itself
once
is in
again it's sort
crisis,
of.
then the EU is in a bigger crisis because the EU
Mhm.
was built by Jacques Delors in the image of the French state. He was a devout Catholic. He believed in the dirigiste model, which you could argue goes back to Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And we can argue that if France and Germany are in crisis, if they do not have social cohesion to even agree upon a budget, Alex Gloy is right. The EU is in big crisis because the EU has relatively high energy costs. The Russia-Ukraine war has weakened its industrial might. The EU is suffering because the EU bet on exports. French were exporting luxury goods to China, and the Germans were importing cars. So both Mercedes and Chanel now are suffering. And you also have at the same time, in addition to these two double whammies. In addition to this double whammy, American protectionism looming large. And mind you, even Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act was protectionist. So Europe has had a triple whammy. Add to that the regulatory self-inflicted wound that Europe has inflicted on itself, wherein it's just impossible to get anything done. And in fact, no other than Chancellor Olaf Scholz, a German um, equivalent of the prime minister, has talked about ending red tape. No one quite manages it.
Well, we've described, I think well, that those who have solutions have helped institutionalize paralysis, and those who propose new solutions are offering fantasies that make things actually worse. But I don't think we, any better than anybody else, actually has seen a clear way out of the mess that everybody is in.
Brilliant. So Shiju Verghese, one of our viewers and a longtime supporter of Fair Observer, has pointed out that there there was Democrat inquisition into Kamala Harris's defeat. This is by Cenk Uygur, Young Turks podcast, and apparently 96% of the Latin community rejected the term Latinx. And he also said Barry Weiss's interview of Peter Thiel is worth watching because, of course, Peter Thiel was one of the backers of Donald Trump last time. He's the author of Zero to One. He's a venture capitalist who funded Facebook and Palantir and is the head of the PayPal mafia. And on the whole, there's lots to learn, lots to understand, lots to make sense of. We will continue to make sense of the world for you. We are living in troubled times. If you want to understand them, read Fair Observer. If you have specific questions, come to FOI. Glenn Carl will answer your questions and be the oracle. Um, it's Thanksgiving tomorrow. We are recording this on Wednesday, 27 November 2024. So those of you who are here, happy Thanksgiving. Those of you who will watch us later, happy Thanksgiving or happy belated Thanksgiving. Do sign up for our newsletter. Do like our YouTube channel. Do follow us on LinkedIn. And from Glenn and me, it's bye for now.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.